She hadn't seen Keanu Reeves in over 30 years, until one quiet message reopened a door neither of them thought still existed. What he sent back wasn't just a reply. It was a confession, a forgotten promise, and a journal that changed everything. But why had he kept her voice in his life all this time? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Maya Calderon had built a quiet, respected life. She taught environmental science at a small university in Vancouver, not far from the ocean she loved so deeply. Her students admired her for her dedication, not only to the subject but to the people she mentored. She wasn't famous. She didn't seek attention. And she had long ago made peace with the idea that some stories in life don't get a second act. That night, she sat in her modest living room, surrounded by stacks of scientific journals, sipping mint tea from the same chipped mug she'd used for over a decade. The world outside was still, covered in the soft hush of late autumn rain. The only sound was the tapping of her laptop keys as she read through news alerts. Most of it was routine: climate policy updates, ecological reports, another study on microplastics. Then she saw the headline: Keanu Reeves quietly funds multi-million-dollar ocean cleanup project off British Columbia coast. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. Keanu Reeves. It wasn't just the name. It was the sudden flood of memory that came with it. Toronto, 1984. The year she thought her life might go in a very different direction. The article didn't say much, just that the anonymous donation, recently traced back to Reeves through a marine foundation, was helping remove deep-sea debris from sensitive coastal zones. He had declined to comment, as usual, but confirmed his support for projects that protect Earth's fragile systems. Maya stared at the screen, barely breathing. She hadn't spoken to him in over 30 years. Back in high school, they had shared a strange, beautiful kind of friendship. Long walks through Trinity Bellwoods Park, hours in the school library pretending to study, whispering about philosophy and science, and whether people were meant to chase dreams or live quietly. He was magnetic, even then. Not in the movie star way, he hadn't become that yet, but in a way that made people feel seen, safe. They were never officially together, but there were glances that lingered, a few almost kisses, and one moment by the lakeshore the week before graduation when she had nearly told him how she really felt. But then he was gone. Vanished. A sudden move to Los Angeles with his mother, no forwarding address, no goodbye. She never stopped wondering what might have happened if he had stayed. Now here he was, not just alive and well, but using his influence to support causes she had dedicated her life to. A part of her wanted to let the moment pass, to close the laptop and pretend she hadn't seen the article. But another part, the part that still remembered how he used to ask her the big questions no one else did, couldn't let it go. So she opened a new tab and typed the name of the Ocean Cleanup Foundation listed in the article. There was a general contact form, nothing fancy, probably screened by assistants if it ever reached him at all. Still, she typed. She stared at the blinking cursor, unsure of what to say. Should she mention the article? Their past? Would he even remember her? Maya let her fingers hover, then slowly began to type. Dear Mr. Reeves, Keanu... She paused and backspaced. That felt wrong, too formal, and yet too familiar. She started again. Hi, Keanu. I'm not sure if this message will ever reach you, but I saw the article about the Ocean Initiative, and I just wanted to say thank you. What you're doing matters. I work in environmental science here in Vancouver, and knowing that someone with your platform is supporting this kind of work, it means a lot. She hesitated. That was safe, respectful. It didn't say too much, but it also didn't say what she really wanted to. She continued. We went to school together, Jarvis Collegiate, in Toronto, class of '84. We were friends. I'm not reaching out for anything, just wanted to say thank you for what you're doing for the ocean. It reminded me of a conversation we had once, sitting by Lake Ontario, wondering whether anyone really listened when the planet asked for help. I guess you did, and I never forgot that. She read it twice, her heart pounding. Then, with a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, she hit send. The moment the screen confirmed message submitted, she almost regretted it. What was she expecting? A response? From Keanu Reeves? He probably had assistants and inbox filters. Even if he saw it, what would he think? That night, she couldn't sleep. She replayed old memories in her head. His crooked smile, the way he tilted his head when she challenged him in a debate, the way he used to sketch in the margins of his notebook while she scribbled formulas. Back then, he'd talk about impossible dreams, changing the world, leaving a mark that mattered. She had always thought he was destined for something big. Still, when nothing arrived the next day, she let it go. She had a lecture to prepare and a grant proposal due. The message had been a moment of nostalgia, nothing more. But the following afternoon, when she returned home from campus, something strange happened. There was a small envelope in her mailbox. Not an email, not a package, a real letter. No return address, just her name. Handwritten. Her heart skipped. She tore it open carefully, as if the paper might vanish if she touched it too roughly. Inside was a single page. Also handwritten. Familiar, slightly tilted penmanship she hadn't seen in decades. She sat down on the steps of her porch, the envelope shaking in her hands. Maya, it began. There was no greeting, no formality, just her name. And below it, words that would unravel everything she thought she understood about the past. I've thought about you more times than I can count. I just never believed I had the right to reach back. Until now. I've thought about you more times than I can count. I just never believed I had the right to reach back. Until now. Maya blinked hard. Her eyes scanned the page again, as if unsure the words were real. Keanu's handwriting was unmistakable, still a little messy, still a little rushed, like he always had more to say than time would allow. She kept reading. I read your message 3 times before I could find the right way to answer it. I didn't expect it, and yet I did. Maybe that's strange to say, but it felt like something that had been waiting for a long time to happen. A gust of wind rustled the trees in her front yard, but Maya barely noticed. Thank you for writing to me, the letter continued. Not just for the kind words about the project, but for remembering. I do remember. Lake Ontario. That impossible conversation. The way you looked at the water like it was trying to tell us something. Maya felt her chest tighten. I've carried pieces of those days with me, he wrote, more than I let on. You once told me that the earth doesn't scream, it whispers, and that if we really wanted to help it, we had to learn to hear those whispers. I've never forgotten that. It's one of the reasons I support these ocean efforts now. A leaf drifted down beside her. The world was still, as if listening with her. I'm writing this by hand, he continued, because it felt wrong to answer you with a message typed out by someone else. Some things are worth slowing down for, like real letters, like memories that still mean something. Maya pressed the page closer to her chest. Would you be open to catching up properly, not through assistance or public channels, just 2 old friends? There's a coffee place in Gastown I used to go to when filming up north. I could be there next week if you'd like. No pressure, but I'd like to hear about your work, about the world you've built. He signed it simply, Keanu. No last name, no contact number, just a name. One word, heavy with the weight of years that had passed in silence. Maya sat in stunned quiet, the letter still trembling between her fingers. It wasn't just a reply, it was an opening. A door she hadn't dared to believe could ever swing open again. And now, the question wasn't whether he would respond, it was whether she was brave enough to walk through it. The letter lay on Maya's desk like something sacred, fragile yet pulsing with unfinished history. She had read it 5 times now, each time slower than the last. But it was the small slip of paper tucked behind the letter that brought tears to her eyes. A sketch, faded and worn, drawn in graphite pencil on yellowing notebook paper. It showed a tide pool edged by jagged rocks, a tiny starfish clinging to one side. Above it, he'd written in his unmistakable slant, "Where everything meets." Maya's ocean. She covered her mouth with her hand. That tide pool was real. They'd visited it one weekend during high school, sneaking out early from a class field trip in Kingston to explore the shoreline. While the others took photos and played loud music, she'd crouched down beside the rocky edge and showed Keanu the living system inside that shallow pool. The barnacles, the mussels, the glinting anemone that closed up when touched. He had listened, with the kind of focus most people reserved for sermons or symphonies. And afterward, on the long bus ride back to Toronto, he'd opened his sketchbook and tried to draw it. She remembered teasing him about the crooked lines. He'd grinned and said, "I'm better at memorizing faces than seaweed." She never thought he'd kept it. Now here it was, decades later, folded beside a letter that felt more like a bridge than a reply. She sat back in her chair and let the memories come. High school hadn't been easy for either of them. Maya was the overachiever from a single-parent home, always balancing part-time jobs with straight A's. Keanu was the soft-spoken kid who drifted between cliques but never fully belonged. They found each other on the margins, 2 oddballs who spent lunch breaks talking about Carl Sagan and coral reefs instead of cafeteria gossip. One night after a school play, they sat under a flickering streetlight in front of Jarvis High and made a pact. He wanted to act in movies that meant something. She wanted to study the ocean and find a way to stop the damage she already saw happening along the coasts. They promised, right there on that cracked sidewalk, to never choose comfort over meaning, to never let the world make them smaller. And then, not long after that night, he was gone. She never got a goodbye, just a rumor in the halls that Keanu had left Toronto, maybe for LA, maybe for Vancouver. She didn't believe it until she saw him in a commercial months later, then in a movie, then everywhere. She had told herself she understood. People leave, dreams change. But she carried a quiet ache every time she saw his face in a film. That unspoken goodbye had settled into her like a scar beneath the skin. Now here he was again, not just remembering her, but remembering everything. "You made my world bigger before I ever became famous," he'd written. Maya leaned forward and gently traced the sketch with her fingertips. All these years, she'd wondered if their time together had mattered, if it had been real to him. The sketch, the words, the letter, each piece said yes in a different way. The next morning, Maya pulled a box from the back of her bedroom closet. It was one she hadn't opened in years. Her high school keepsakes, stored away through college, graduate school, motherhood, and tenure. Inside were old photographs, faded concert tickets, debate team medals, and a small, cracked journal with ocean stickers on the cover. She sat cross-legged on the floor and opened it. The entries were sparse, written between exams and part-time shifts at the campus bookstore, but scattered throughout were mentions of Keanu, sometimes just initials, KR, next to a doodle of stars or waves. One page, dated April 12th, read, "Showed him the tide pool today. He watched like it was a cathedral. Said he'd never seen anything more alive." She paused, swallowing a lump in her throat. On another page, she'd written a quote from a Carl Sagan book they'd read together. "Somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known." Beneath it, in her younger handwriting, Kay said he wants to memorize this feeling. "I hope he does." Maya pressed the journal to her chest. All this time, she had remembered him as the boy who slipped away without a word. But this, his letter, the sketch, The memory tucked inside her journal told a different story. One not of abandonment, but of reverence, maybe even regret. She found herself whispering out loud, "Why didn't you ever write back?" Later that afternoon, she reread his new letter again, noticing something she had skipped over in her awe. The first time, the envelope had been postmarked from California, but the letter's closing line was different. He'd signed it. Keanu, still wondering what would have happened if I'd stayed. There was something open-ended in that line. Not romantic, exactly, but tender, raw. And beneath it, a final sentence added in handwriting that trailed slightly off the lines. "If you still believe in impossible things, let me know." That was what stopped her cold. Because it wasn't just a sweet sentiment. It was a challenge. A door left ajar. The same kind of possibility they'd clung to as teenagers when he dreamed of meaning through performance. And she dreamed of saving the ocean. She thought back to that night outside the school auditorium, how they'd sat shoulder to shoulder, sharing fries and sketching out their futures like architects of something bigger than either of them. She remembered him saying, "Most people dream of success, but you dream of significance. That's what makes you dangerous, Maya Calderon." And she had laughed, thrown a fry at him, and said, "Then I guess we're both dangerous." Now here he was, decades later, reminding her of the pact they'd once made. To chase meaningful lives, no matter the cost. She had done her best to live by that, choosing environmental science when more lucrative paths called, fighting for grant money year after year, staying up late to write papers and advocate for policy change. But something inside her had grown quiet over time. Like the part of her that once whispered, "What if?" had faded beneath practicality. Until now. And somehow, with just one letter, Keanu had woken it back up. That evening, as the rain began to fall softly outside her Vancouver window, Maya placed the sketch from Keanu beside her old journal. The tide pool. Even after all these years, it still looked exactly as she remembered. A shallow basin of water carved into the rocks off the coast near Toronto, brimming with tiny sea creatures and life. Back then, it had been their sanctuary. There was one particular evening she would never forget. They had cut class, not something either of them usually did. Keanu had convinced her to skip their afternoon electives and head out to the bluffs where the tide pools formed. "One afternoon won't ruin your GPA," he'd said, "but it might save your soul." They had walked the shoreline in their beat-up sneakers, letting the wind tangle their hair and the salt cling to their skin. Maya had crouched near the edge of the pool, pointing out sea stars and barnacles. Keanu had sat cross-legged beside her, sketching what he saw on a scrap of notebook paper. They had stayed for hours, talking about futures, about what it meant to do something that mattered. He'd confessed that acting wasn't about fame for him, it was about storytelling, about giving people something to feel, something that could change them. She had nodded, saying that science wasn't just about lab coats and data. It was about understanding how everything was connected, how protecting something small could ripple out to protect something enormous. That day, he had taken her hand, and she had let him. Not out of romance exactly, but out of something deeper, a recognition. Two young people daring to imagine that their passions could change the world. They'd made a pact that day, simple, unwritten. "Promise me we'll never settle for anything that doesn't make us come alive." She'd whispered it into the wind, and he had repeated it back. Now, sitting in her quiet apartment, Maya realized something devastating. She had kept that promise for a while. But in recent years, she had started to shrink herself, stopped speaking up in faculty meetings, avoided conflict with university leadership, published safe papers instead of the bold ones that once stirred controversy. Somewhere between raising her daughter and building a career, the fire had dimmed. But Keanu's letter had struck a match. He remembered her, not just the girl she had been, but the fierce, uncompromising way she used to see the world. And somehow, after all this time, he was still carrying that version of her in his mind. Maya placed the letter carefully back in its envelope, her fingers trembling slightly. She didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear. She was done playing small. The phone call came on a Thursday afternoon while Maya was in her office at the university, preparing lecture slides on microplastics in marine ecosystems. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, Los Angeles area code. She hesitated before answering. "Hello?" A calm, familiar voice came through. "Maya? It's Keanu." She felt her heart stutter in her chest. For a second, she couldn't speak. His voice, warm, thoughtful, sounded exactly like it had in the letter, but hearing it live was something else entirely. "Yes," she said softly, after a breath. "Hi. Hope I didn't catch you at a bad time." "Oh, no. I was just working." "I'll keep it quick," he said. "I've been thinking about your message and the letter I sent. I wasn't sure you'd read it." "I did," Maya replied, "more than once." There was a pause, not awkward but weighted. Then he continued, "I'm funding a small project on the coast. Big Sur, it's a coastal research station. Quiet, remote, focused on preservation and restoration. It's nothing flashy, but it's important to me. I'd love for you to visit it." Maya blinked. "Visit?" "Just for a few days," he said. "See what we're working on. Talk to some of the team. Maybe share some ideas. I thought it might be something you'd appreciate." She leaned back in her chair, staring at the fading sunlight stretching across the floor of her office. The idea pulled at something inside her. Curiosity, nostalgia, and something deeper she couldn't yet name. "Keanu, that's generous, but I have classes and a daughter and I'm not sure I can just take off." "I understand," he said. "I really do. No pressure. Just thought I'd extend the invitation." After a pause, he added, "You once told me we should never stop chasing the things that made our hearts beat faster. I never forgot that." She smiled, closing her eyes. "That old memory again. Let me think about it." "Of course. Take your time. If you decide to come, my team will handle everything. Just let me know." They said goodbye, and Maya sat there in silence for a long time. The tide of emotion from their reconnection had already been powerful, but this felt like a wave cresting into something larger. That night, over dinner, she mentioned the call to Sophia. "I want you to visit where?" Sophia asked, her eyebrows raised as she reached for more lentils. "Her research project in Big Sur. He's funding a small team there, restoration, marine ecology, that sort of thing." Sophia blinked, a slow grin spreading across her face. "So, he's inviting you to California? Like a science-y vacation?" "It's not a vacation," Maya said, too quickly. "It's professional. Maybe." Sophia leaned back in her chair, fork poised in midair. "Mom, come on. You've been talking about Keanu Reeves since I was a kid, and I thought he was just some guy you went to school with. Now he sends you handwritten letters and wants you to fly out to his secret science retreat?" Maya laughed despite herself. "It's not a secret retreat, it's a research station. Call it what you want," Sophia said. "But this sounds like the beginning of one of those stories you always think only happens to other people." Maya fell quiet. Sophia's tone was teasing, but her eyes were serious. "What if it's your second chance, Mom?" The next morning, Maya stood in her kitchen with a mug of coffee, the letter still open on the table beside her. She'd reread it again before bed, then once more after waking up. The tide pool sketch. The line, "You made my world bigger before I ever became famous." It stirred something buried, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She glanced at her phone, the last message from Keanu still sitting in her inbox like a question waiting for an answer. It was simple, "Whenever you're ready, the door is open." Maya opened her laptop and pulled up her teaching calendar. The semester was halfway through, but she had guest lecturers lined up for the next 2 weeks. just in case she needed a break. It had started as a precaution during a rough allergy season, but maybe it was more than that. Maybe some part of her had already sensed this moment coming. She called her department chair, explained the opportunity in vague terms, consulting on a private coastal research initiative in California. To her surprise, he was supportive. "You've been due for a little time away," he said. "Take the week. Let us know if it leads to anything exciting." That afternoon, she sat down with Sophia again, this time more serious. "So, I think I'm going." Sophia smiled wide. "I knew you would. It's just a visit. I'm not uprooting my life." "I know. But still," she said, "this matters, Mom. I can feel it." Later that night, Maya typed out a response to Keanu. It was just one sentence. "Yes, I'd like to visit." The reply came within the hour. "I'll have my assistant send you the details. Looking forward to it, Maya." 2 days later, a sleek black car arrived at her Vancouver home to take her to the airport. She packed light, just enough clothes for 4 days, her favorite journal, and a copy of the tide pool field guide she and Keanu had used in high school. She hesitated before packing the letter, but finally tucked it into the side pocket of her bag. At the airport, everything moved smoothly. First-class boarding, expedited security, a seat by the window. Her name had been flagged for concierge service. It felt surreal, like stepping into someone else's story. As the plane lifted from the runway, Maya looked out at the clouds streaking across the sky and wondered what exactly she was flying toward. A reconnection? A professional opportunity? Or something she couldn't yet name? She pulled out the field guide and flipped through the pages, stopping at one illustration of a small, star-shaped tide pool creature she remembered showing Keanu all those years ago. "They survive because they're flexible," she'd told him back then. "Not the strongest or the fastest, just the ones who adapt." Now, at 47, she wondered if the same lesson still applied. Maybe this wasn't about going backward. Maybe it was about allowing life to shift, to stretch, to include something new. Outside, the plane dipped lower, descending over the California coast. Rugged cliffs, rolling waves, a line of redwoods in the distance. And just beyond the edge of the land, a small cluster of buildings nestled near the shoreline. Her heart beat faster. The car that met her at the airport was quiet, its driver courteous but largely silent. Maya appreciated that. She needed time to absorb what she was seeing. They drove along the winding Pacific Coast Highway, cliffs dropping steeply into surf on one side, towering trees on the other. It was wild, untouched in places. She could already smell the salt in the air. The facility wasn't marked by any signs, just a turnoff onto a narrow dirt road, then a long descent toward a secluded stretch of rocky beach. Nestled between two cliffs was a cluster of modern, low-profile buildings, built from wood and glass, blending into the landscape. As the car came to a stop, a woman in her 30s stepped out of the main building, clipboard in hand. "Dr. Calderon? Welcome. I'm Raina, program coordinator. Mr. Reeves asked me to show you around." Maya stepped out, her shoes crunching softly on gravel. "Is he here?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "He's on site," Raina said with a warm smile. "He just finished a dive with the Marine Research Team. He'll join us shortly." They began walking toward the central research building, passing a greenhouse, a solar panel array, and what looked like a small dormitory for visiting researchers. Everything was clean, efficient, and surprisingly humble. Maya noticed compost bins, rainwater catchment systems, and several coastal restoration signs. This wasn't just a vanity project. Inside, Raina handed her a schedule. "You're welcome to join any of the observation sessions, lectures, or field dives while you're here. We also arranged a space for you in the guest cabin with a full view of the tide pools. Mr. Reeves thought you'd like that." Maya felt something shift inside her. Not just appreciation, but recognition. He remembered. She was led to her cabin, set apart from the main facility. It was simple but beautiful. glass walls on one side, looking out at the surf crashing against black rock and shimmering pools below. On the small desk was a welcome note, handwritten. It read, "For the girl who taught me how to see tide pools. Welcome back." Maya sat down slowly, the sound of the waves filling the room. She had crossed into a different world, and maybe a different version of herself. The knock came just before sunset. Maya had been sitting by the wide glass window in her cottage, watching the light shift over the tide pools, when she heard it. 3 quiet taps. Not rushed, not loud, just gentle. She opened the door to find Keanu standing there, dressed in a simple windbreaker and jeans, his hair slightly windblown. He looked older than the boy she remembered, but something in his eyes hadn't changed. That quiet depth, that stillness. "Hi," he said. Maya smiled. "Hi, you made it." "I did. I'm glad." He motioned toward a winding trail along the cliffs. "Want to see the ocean before it gets dark?" She grabbed her sweater from the hook and followed him. They walked in comfortable silence, the sound of waves below cushioning their steps. The sea air was sharp and clean. Gulls circled overhead. Around them, wild sage and sea lavender lined the narrow trail. "It smells the same," Maya said quietly. Keanu looked over at her. "It's why I chose this place. Reminded me of Hanlon's Point." She let out a soft laugh. "You and that starfish. You called it the mayor of the tide pool," he said, smiling. They stopped at a wooden overlook perched above the reef. The water below shimmered with the last gold of day. Keanu leaned on the railing, and Maya did the same. "I used to come here while they were building the place," he said. "Made decisions on where the labs would go, where the walkways should curve, but mostly I sat right here, thinking." She turned toward him, surprised. "You designed it?" He nodded. "Not all the science stuff, but the layout, the intention. I didn't want this to feel like a facility. I wanted it to feel alive." "I dies," Maya whispered. Keanu reached into the bag slung across his shoulder and pulled out a worn manila folder. He held it delicately, almost reverently, as he opened it. "I kept something," he said, handing her a paper. It was brittle at the edges, the ink slightly faded, but Maya recognized it instantly. Her undergraduate paper, Tide Pool Resilience as a Model for Reef Restoration. She stared at it, stunned. "Where did you get this?" "You gave it to me," he said, "after your university symposium. I remember you were wearing that ridiculous ocean-themed scarf with jellyfish on it." She laughed. "I thought it made me look credible. I thought it made you look brave." Maya looked back at the paper. "I can't believe you still have this." "I didn't just keep it," Keanu said. "I gave it to the lead marine biologist here. We built part of the lab's restoration protocols from it. Your ideas weren't just good. They were ahead of their time." Her throat tightened. She ran her fingers gently along the margin where she had scribbled last-minute notes to herself. "No one ever noticed this paper," she murmured. "Not even my advisor. I thought it disappeared into a filing cabinet forever." "It didn't," Keanu said. "It became part of this." They descended a gentle slope that led from the cliffside trail to the main facility. A curved wooden path arched through clusters of native dune grass, and in the distance the low-slung outline of the research station emerged. Simple, solar-paneled, and shaped to blend into the surrounding coastline. Keanu guided her through a side entrance. Inside, the air was cool and quietly humming with equipment. Long windows filled the rooms with ocean light. Walls were lined with maps of coral structures, sketches of marine organisms, and a rotating digital feed of water temperature and salinity levels. "This is our reef lab," Keanu said. "We're running microhabitat simulations here, controlled tide pool tanks, sediment analyses, nutrient flow." Maya stepped forward slowly, mesmerized by the tanks. Each one replicated a different coastal condition, In one, sea urchins clustered along a rocky wall. In another, a tiny anemone reached toward a slow jet of filtered seawater. She turned toward a whiteboard filled with calculations. Her eyes traced a formula she hadn't seen in years. It was a model she had proposed in her thesis, the one everyone said was too idealistic to implement. "This is my theory on artificial reef scaffolding," she said aloud, almost in disbelief. Keanu nodded. "It works. Your model predicted coral settlement behavior better than the others we tested. We made a few tweaks, but it's mostly yours." Maya's hand touched the whiteboard, the dry erase marker line still faintly smudged from someone's hand. She felt a lump rise in her throat. For so long, her ideas had felt small, academic, trapped inside papers and PowerPoint slides. But here they were real, breathing, growing, helping. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why me? You could have asked any expert." "Because it wasn't just about credentials," Keanu said. "It was about voice, about vision. You asked questions back then that no one else was asking. I never forgot them." She turned to face him. "But you went off and became everything. Movies, fame, the Matrix. You became larger than life. I assumed, I don't know, that I'd been a footnote." "You were never a footnote, Maya," he said softly. "You were the margin that changed the meaning of the page." They stood in the lab's quiet for a long moment, the soft bubbling of tanks around them like the rhythm of memory resurfacing. Then Keanu gestured toward a glass door leading outside. "Come on, there's something else I want to show you." They stepped back into the open air. Just beyond the lab, nestled into a rise of earth and sea rock, stood a small wooden structure. Weathered, one room wide, with driftwood steps leading to a wraparound porch. "I built this during the early construction phase," he said. Didn't tell anyone. Not on the blueprints, just needed a place that felt real. Not a set, not a spotlight." Maya tilted her head. "Is this where you stay?" He nodded. "Sometimes, when I want to think, when I want to remember who I was before the noise started." Maya stepped toward the cottage, then paused, struck by the quiet truth of it. No press, no handlers, just wind, waves, and an actor who never really left the edge of the ocean. Inside, the cottage smelled faintly of cedar and sea salt. The space was simple, just a desk, a small kitchenette, a narrow bed, and a weathered armchair facing the ocean through wide glass windows. A kettle sat cold on the stove. Books were stacked in corners. Most were science, marine ecosystems, coastal engineering, even one of Maya's own co-authored textbooks. She blinked at the sight of it. "You kept this?" she asked, pulling it gently from the shelf. Keanu smiled without hesitation. "Read it cover to cover, twice. The chapter on dynamic kelp forest mapping? Brilliant." Maya let out a breath that was half laughter, half disbelief. "I wrote that in a coffee-fueled haze during a sabbatical. I didn't think anyone actually used it." He looked at her. "I did." The air shifted again. Intimate, reverent. Not romantic yet, not longing, but full of mutual awe. A current older than fame and reputation, running beneath the years. On the desk sat a thick folder, edges frayed and corners curled with age. Maya picked it up, flipping it open. Inside were clippings, letters, and hand-drawn sketches from their teenage years. She paused at one. It was a sketch she remembered well, a crude outline of a tide pool, with annotations scribbled in the margins. Her own handwriting next to his. Notes about salinity, marine snails, sunlight angles. "This was our field trip journal," she said, stunned. "From that summer we spent at the Ontario coast." "I found it when I moved out of my mother's house," Keanu replied. "Couldn't bring myself to throw it away." Maya's eyes moved down to the bottom corner of the page, where a familiar phrase was scrawled. "Always chase the meaningful, not the easy." It was something she had said once. A throwaway comment, or so she thought. You remembered this too? I built entire choices around that line, he said quietly. She turned away, walking slowly to the porch. Her heart was thudding. Not from romance, but from the weight of being seen, of mattering. Not as a woman reconnected with a famous man, but as a thinker, a partner, a presence that had shaped something lasting. Outside, the sun had begun to dip. The Pacific stretched before them like molten glass, and gulls drifted on invisible wind currents. Below, the water hit the rocks in rhythmic surges. Keanu joined her on the porch, leaning silently on the wooden rail beside her. For a moment, they just watched the tide roll in. I'm not used to people remembering the parts of me that aren't public, Maya said. I'm not used to people seeing me before I became public, Keanu replied. You're the last person who knew me before all of it, before the agents, the premieres, the headlines. You knew the awkward kid who couldn't stop talking about quantum physics and old movies. I liked that kid, Maya said softly. And he never stopped liking you, he replied, voice almost carried off by the wind. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was heavy with meaning. The kind of silence only people with shared history could inhabit without needing to fill. Eventually, Keanu gestured back toward the lab. Tomorrow, I'll show you the reef deployment footage. We're testing settlement tiles based on your early work. I'd love your opinion. Maya nodded. I'd like that. They didn't hug, didn't touch, just stood there for a few minutes more, the past alive in the present. Then, Keanu offered to walk her back to the guest quarters at the research center, and she accepted. As they reached the path, she paused once more to look back at the little cottage, nestled quietly against the vast open sea. It wasn't just a place, it was a symbol. He hadn't brought her here to impress. He'd brought her here to remember. And in doing so, something long buried within Maya stirred awake. Not just old affection, but purpose. And maybe the start of something entirely new. The days that followed moved slowly, not in the way that made time feel heavy, but in the kind that made everything feel more alive. Maya had expected her visit to Big Sur to be filled with awkward silences, but instead, the silence between her and Keanu was soft, almost comforting, like the kind that existed between two people who didn't need to rush to fill space with words. In the mornings, she woke early and stood at the edge of the cliff, watching the waves roll in beneath the mist. Most days, Keanu was already outside, sipping tea from a battered tin mug, his face lit gently by the rising sun. He didn't say much when she joined him, just offered her a second mug. Always hot, always ready. Sometimes they talked. About old music they used to share on cassette tapes. About the books they traded during study hall. About how neither of them had ever really liked gym class but loved history, especially when they could debate it. She reminded him how he once fell asleep in the library with a copy of Walden on his chest, and he laughed, saying that book had made him think solitude was romantic for far too long. They took long walks along the bluff trails, stopping to inspect tide pools or watch the occasional pelican dive. There was no schedule, no pressure, just moments. Keanu introduced her to the local team working at the research station. People from nearby towns and small coastal villages who had grown up with the ocean in their blood. Fishermen's daughters, surfers turned data analysts, retired divers who now monitored kelp forest health with drones. Maya was deeply moved. He could have hired anyone with glossy resumes, but instead, he had built a team that mirrored her own values. Authentic, grounded, and driven by care. Keanu mentioned that most of the hiring decisions had been guided by one of her old lectures he found online. Something about the importance of rooting innovation in lived experience. She didn't even remember saying it, but he did. He always remembered the things she thought were small. That evening, they sat on the back porch of the cottage, the ocean wind gently stirring the wind chimes made of driftwood and shell. A quiet had settled between them again. This time, it felt different, There was something beneath it, an almost visible weight in the air, as though Keanu was building toward something unsaid. "I almost wrote you," he said finally, looking out at the sea. "The week after I left Toronto. I had this whole letter drafted, never sent it." Maya turned toward him. "Why not?" He hesitated. "Because I didn't know if staying in touch would help you move forward or just hold you in the past. I didn't want to become some anchor you had to carry." She blinked, stunned by the thoughtfulness behind the silence and by how familiar it sounded. That very instinct, to protect someone by pulling away, was one she understood all too well. "I never wanted you to disappear," she said softly. Keanu didn't answer right away. He stood, walked inside the cottage for a moment, and returned carrying something in his hands, a worn leather journal, its spine cracked and faded with time. "I think it's time you saw this," he said. Maya took the journal carefully, her fingertips brushing over the faded edges. It felt delicate but not fragile, like something that had weathered many years without breaking. She opened the cover and immediately recognized Keanu's handwriting. The same slanted letters he used in high school when they'd passed notes during class, scribbled thoughts in the margins of textbooks, or annotated books they loaned each other. The first page was dated June 1987. "Dear Maya," it began, "it's been 3 days since I left, and the quiet here feels louder than it should." She paused, looking up at him. "You wrote this after you moved to Los Angeles?" she asked. Keanu nodded, his expression unreadable. "Every time I thought of something I wanted to tell you, I wrote it down. I didn't know if I'd ever send them, but I couldn't let the words go unsaid. Not completely." Maya turned back to the journal and kept reading. The entries weren't traditional diary notes, they were letters. Intimate, thoughtful, and filled with small details from his life. One recounted the overwhelming chaos of his first audition. Another described walking alone through Venice Beach, wondering if the path he was on made sense. Others were more abstract, questions about life, notes about a film he saw that reminded him of a conversation they'd once had about storytelling and truth. And always, at the heart of it, her was sophisticated. "You kept writing these Earls for years?" she asked, flipping toward the middle of the journal. The entries stretched across decades, through the early 90s when his fame began to rise, through difficult years marked only by cryptic lines like, "Today was a loss. I wish I could hear your voice." One letter was from 1999, dated 2 weeks after his longtime girlfriend passed away. "I don't know who to talk to," he had written. "You always understood grief better than I did." Keanu didn't speak as she read. He just sat nearby, sipping his tea, giving her space to process. One entry, written in 2003, took her breath away. "I saw a documentary today about ocean microplastics. It made me think of that essay you wrote in 12th grade. The one about how the smallest changes could ripple through entire ecosystems. I still have a copy. You said something in that paper that stayed with me for years. What we choose to care about becomes the world we live in." I've been trying to live by that. Maya closed the journal slowly, her hands trembling just slightly. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Keanu replied. "I never meant for you to read them, not at first. But over time, they became a part of me. And I guess I wanted you to know that even when I was gone, I never really let go of you." She looked out at the ocean, then back at him. "You carried me with you." "I tried to leave it all behind," he admitted. "The memories, the feelings, the what-ifs. But they came with me anyway. In film sets, in hotel rooms, on quiet nights when the world didn't need anything from me." For a moment, neither of them moved. The wind rustled through the trees, and the ocean kept whispering its endless lullaby below. Finally, Maya spoke. "I thought I'd imagined most of it, that what we had was just a teenage friendship I romanticized over the years." "It was real," Keanu said. "Maybe the most real thing I've known." Her voice was quiet. "I don't know if I ever stopped waiting. for a letter. And I kept writing them, he said. That night, Maya couldn't sleep. The journal lay on the small desk in her guest room, its leather cover slightly curled at the edges, as if it had lived many lives. She had only read a fraction of the letters, but already her heart felt heavier and lighter at the same time. She walked out onto the small balcony that overlooked the moonlit ocean and pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The sound of the waves reminded her of those nights long ago, sitting with Keanu on the rocks near their high school in Toronto, talking about things that felt too big for teenagers to hold. The world had seemed both infinite and fleeting then. They had made promises, not to each other exactly, but to life, to try, to care, to never sleepwalk through the years. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, the scent of salt and pine filling her lungs. Behind her, there was a gentle knock on the doorframe. Keanu stood there in a plain hoodie and jeans, barefoot, his expression hesitant. "Sorry," he said softly. "Didn't mean to intrude." "You're not," she replied, stepping aside so he could join her. They stood in silence for a long time. "I was scared you'd be angry," he finally said. Maya turned to him. "Why?" "For never reaching out, for vanishing, for writing letters instead of making calls." She considered that. "I think. I buried a part of us because it hurt too much to think about. But I never felt angry. Just unfinished." He nodded, understanding something unspoken. "I was never brave enough to finish anything," he said. "Not where you were concerned. I thought I'd ruin what was beautiful if I touched it again. But here we are," she said gently. He smiled. "Here we are." Another breeze passed between them, cool and damp with sea spray. She turned to him with a question in her eyes. "Way now?" she asked. "After all these years, what made you respond to my message?" Keanu looked at the sky for a moment, then back at her. "Because when I saw your name, it felt like a lifeline. These past few years, I've done a lot. Traveled, worked, tried to help where I could, but something's always been missing. I've never built anything that felt like it would last. Until this place. Until you wrote to me." Maya's throat tightened. He looked away, then back. "I know we're not the same people we were at 17. We've both lived lives, made choices. But there's a part of me that never stopped listening for your voice. And when it came back, I had to answer." She didn't trust herself to speak, so she just nodded. He stepped back, offering a small, respectful smile. "Good night, Maya." "Good night, Keanu." As he disappeared into the hallway, Maya looked back out at the sea, the journal still resting on her desk, filled with 30 years of unsent words. And for the first time in a long while, the quiet didn't feel lonely. It felt full, like something waiting to be discovered. The rain began just after midnight, soft and steady against the roof of the small guest cottage. But Maya wasn't sleeping. She sat cross-legged on the bed, surrounded by pages. The leather-bound journal Keanu had handed her earlier that evening lay open beside her, a stack of carefully folded letters forming a fragile constellation around it. She had meant to read just one or two. Instead, hours had passed. Each letter was dated. Some were marked from film sets she recognized: Sydney, Berlin, Los Angeles. Others were scrawled on scraps of paper, their ink slightly smudged, as if written in haste during flights or long nights. They began just months after Keanu had left Toronto, when he was barely finding his footing in Los Angeles. His words in those early letters were tentative, searching, filled with longing and guilt. She saw how often he second-guessed the silence between them, how often he wished he could go back and explain his departure. One letter, dated 1995, was written during the filming of A Walk in the Clouds. It was gentler in tone, full of reflections on beauty and nature. He'd written, "The vineyard reminded me of your drawings in class, the way you described underwater ecosystems like they were stories unfolding in slow motion. I keep thinking, would Maya have seen this as harmony or imbalance? Her breath caught as she read those words. Even then, her voice had been alive in his thoughts. Another letter was from 1999, deep in the middle of the Matrix shoot. Keanu had written it in a hotel room in Sydney. "Everyone's obsessed with the action scenes and the tech," he'd written, "but I keep wondering if all this is just metaphor. Would Maya see this as commentary on evolution, on what happens when we disconnect from our natural rhythms?" He'd included a tiny, crude sketch of a tide pool in the margin, labeled simply "Home." With every page, Maya's sense of reality shifted. These weren't just letters. They were glimpses into a parallel timeline, a life she hadn't lived but had unknowingly shaped. Letter after letter, his words weren't just affectionate or nostalgic, they were built on inquiry. He had used her questions as guides, her curiosity as compass, her values as filter. In one especially worn envelope dated 2003, she found a simple note. "It's hard right now. Lost someone important. I don't know how to hold all this grief. But I remembered how you once said that everything in nature adapts or dies. So I'm trying to adapt. I ask myself what Maya would say. And then I try to listen." She put the letter down, eyes stinging. The grief she'd felt for lost time had begun to melt into something else, something closer to awe. The second part of the journal was messier, the handwriting less even, the paper more creased. Maya could almost trace the emotional turbulence behind the pen strokes. There were letters written during years when Keanu's name was everywhere, award shows, headlines, blockbusters. And yet these notes didn't talk about fame. They talked about loneliness, about grounding, about searching for purpose. In a folded page dated 2008, the ink nearly faded, he wrote, "I've never said this out loud to anyone, but sometimes all the noise makes me miss the silence of our old talks. No agents, no scripts, no fan questions, just two people trying to figure out why sea stars survive in freezing tide pools, or why people keep loving even after everything breaks." Another page was clearly written in the middle of personal loss. Maya recognized the year. His partner had passed away. She'd read about it then, in the news, and had mourned quietly from afar, feeling like a stranger to someone she'd once known so well. But the letter in her hand now told a different story. "Maya, I wish I could sit beside you on that cliff near Lake Ontario. I wish I could hear you say that pain doesn't mean we're broken, only that we've opened. You always believed healing was circular. I'm trying to believe that too." She wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. These weren't just memories. They were emotional echoes. And in every line he had carried her words like anchors. Near the back of the journal was a more recent letter, from just a few years ago. "The world keeps telling me I'm a visionary, but the truth is, I borrowed so many of those visions from how you saw the world. Your lens, the one that notices micro shifts in ecosystems, that asks what the tides are trying to tell us, that changed me. You made my world bigger before I ever became famous." She pressed her hand to her chest. The words were beautiful, yes, but more than that, they were proof of a truth she had never imagined. That her life had mattered deeply to someone, even during their decades apart. Maya couldn't stay inside any longer. Her thoughts raced with too much intensity, too much emotion to sit still. She needed air, needed to hear the ocean. She threw on a sweater, slipped into her shoes, and quietly opened the door to the cottage. The wind was cool and salt-rich, the sky a soft blur of stars. Somewhere below, the tide pools waited, ancient, shifting, and alive, a place that once belonged to their youth. And maybe, just maybe, still belonged to something now. Maya followed the winding path toward the cliffs, her footsteps soft against the dew-slick grass. The moonlight cast a silver sheen on the edges of the tide pools, and the scent of brine and kelp wrapped around her like an old song. She slowed as the ground grew uneven, familiar rocks jutting out like quiet sentinels from the past. And then she saw him. Keanu was already there, sitting cross-legged near the largest pool, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the water. He didn't look surprised to see her. It was as if he had been waiting, not just for her arrival tonight, but for something much longer in the making. Maya approached quietly and sat beside him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tide whispered in and out, its rhythm matching the calm between them. "I couldn't sleep," she finally said. He nodded. "Me either." She looked at him, his silhouette softened by the moonlight. "I read more of the letters." He didn't turn his head, but his voice was steady. "They weren't meant to make you feel guilty or burdened." "Debbie didn't," she said. "They made me feel seen." Keanu picked up a small stone and skipped it across the pool's surface. Ripples expanded outward in quiet circles. "You were always the one who asked better questions, the kind that lived in my head for years, that made the world less about what I could take from it and more about what I could protect." Maya looked at him then, really looked, and something in her shifted. All those years she had thought their connection was a passing thing, powerful but temporary. But the truth was sitting next to her, just as steady and certain as the tide beside them. "I didn't know I'd left such a mark," she whispered. "You didn't leave a mark," he said gently. "You rewired the compass." She blinked back, the sting in her eyes. "Why didn't you ever send them, any of the letters?" "I didn't think I had the right," he admitted. "Back then, I thought I was doing the noble thing by letting you go. I didn't want my mess to pull you away from your path." Maya tilted her head toward the dark water. "And now, he said, "I realized the real mistake was assuming we couldn't walk our paths together." They sat in silence again, the weight of those words settling between them. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out the letter he'd sent, the first one, the one that had started all of this. She unfolded it, placed it flat on the stone between them. "This letter," she said, "changed everything. Not just the direction of my week or my work, but how I saw the past." Keanu looked down at the paper. "And the future?" She looked out at the ocean, still not ready to answer that, but in her chest, the answer stirred. Not yet spoken, but no longer uncertain. The next morning dawned with a low mist hanging over the cliffs, softening the edges of the sky and sea. Maya stood outside the cottage, coffee in hand, watching as the early light crept over the water. The air carried a quiet hush, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Keanu appeared beside her without a sound. He wore a navy jacket and jeans, the same quiet presence she remembered from years ago, but his eyes were more weathered now, and yet still held that unwavering intensity when he looked at her. "There's something I want to show you," he said gently. "If you have time this morning." Maya turned to him with a small smile. "I think I can spare a few hours." He led her down a narrow path away from the main facility, past a grove of Monterey pines bent by the coastal wind. The trail opened into a clearing she hadn't seen before. At the center stood a long, low building tucked into the landscape. It looked like part of the terrain, stone walls, a green roof, and wide windows facing the ocean. "And that, what is this?" she asked. Keanu stepped forward and opened the door. "This is yours." Inside, the space opened into a sunlit lab, its design elegant in its simplicity. There were workstations fitted with water analysis tech, an algae filtration system, and a central digital table where sea maps glowed softly. On one wall, hand-drawn diagrams from Maya's earliest university thesis had been printed and framed. Notes in her handwriting, old, imperfect but passionate, had been restored from the original paper. Maya stepped slowly into the room, heart thudding. "I don't understand." Keanu walked over to a glass tank near the window where simulated micro-ecosystems pulsed gently under filtered light. Coral polyps swayed in synthetic current beside carefully controlled chemical sensors. I found your 1997 paper on resilient tide pool systems, when you modeled coral health in fluctuating acidity environments. It stuck with me. For years, Maya turned to him, stunned. That was never published, only presented once at a small conference. I was in the back row, Keanu said with a quiet smile, hiding in a hoodie. I watched you speak about things most people didn't understand yet. You said, sometimes the smallest environments teach us the biggest truths. That line never left me. He handed her a slim tablet from the table. On the screen was a proposal, carefully written, no logos, no names, in bold. It was a research center charter. At the top, in plain text, it read, Director, Dr. Maya Calderon. Maya's breath caught. It's a place to test your theories in real-world settings. Study how coastlines adapt, not just erode. It's fully funded for 5 years. Your name can be public or anonymous. Either way, it's real. And it's waiting. Maya sat slowly on one of the stools by the tank. The implications were staggering. The freedom, the resources, the potential. And what would I be leaving behind? She murmured. Keanu didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the wide windows and looked out over the Pacific. That's not for me to say. Maya sat in the lab long after Keanu had stepped outside, her fingers resting on the edge of the tablet. The title, Director Maya Calderon, stared back at her, like something out of a dream she'd forgotten she'd ever had. For a long time, she just let the idea settle over her. Peace. She had spent years working within the constraints of academia. Grant cycles, institutional politics, research agendas dictated by funding boards. This was different. It was a clean slate, a platform for curiosity, for solutions, for science that could touch real lives. No performance reviews, no publication quotas, just work that mattered. Still, a part of her resisted. Was this really hers to step into? Or was it just the echo of someone else's gratitude, crystallized into bricks and equipment? She left the lab and found Keanu by the lookout. He stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, eyes on the horizon. She came to stand beside him, the wind lifting strands of her hair. I need to ask you something, she said. Her voice was steady, but the question pressed at her chest like a weight. He glanced at her, silent encouragement in his gaze. Is this about me, or is it about you? Trying to thank me for something I didn't even know I gave? Keanu didn't look away. It's not about gratitude, Maya. It's about legacy. Yours and ours, if we're ready. She turned to him fully now. I don't want a memorial. I don't want to be a symbol. I've seen too many women turned into that by well-meaning men. I'm not trying to immortalize you, he said, voice quiet. I'm trying to make space for your voice, the one that challenged me when I was 17, the one that kept challenging me in my head for 30 years. This lab, this project, it's not a gift, it's an answer. An answer to what? He took a breath. To the question you asked me back then, by the lake, remember? You asked, what's the point of building anything if it doesn't make the world kinder, not just smarter? I didn't have an answer. For years I didn't. I just built things. Fast cars, faster rockets. But your question stayed with me. And eventually, I wanted to build something that answered it. Maya looked down, throat tight. I've made mistakes, he continued. I chased speed when I should have chased depth. I let the noise drown out the signal. But this place is different. It's the first thing I've built that doesn't need my name on it to matter. She folded her arms, more for comfort than defense. I don't know if I can leave my students, my colleagues. The structure of it all. I'm not asking you to leave anything, Keanu said. I'm offering you the chance to come home to a part of yourself you might have buried under all that structure. They stood in silence for a while, the waves crashing below like distant thunder. The offer was enormous. So was the trust behind it. Can I think about it? She asked softly. Of course, he said. This isn't about urgency, it's about clarity. That night, Maya walked the cliff path alone, lit by a silver moon and the rhythmic whisper of the waves below. Her thoughts moved restlessly, circling through every version of her life she had lived. Daughter, mother, student, scientist. She had always believed in staying rooted, in building stability for her daughter, her community. But what if she had built so well that she'd forgotten how to reach beyond? Back at the cottage, she found a fresh cup of tea waiting on the porch. Keanu wasn't there, just the tea and a small notebook with a pressed fern on its cover. Inside were sketches, diagrams of reef microstructures, concept notes written in his handwriting but referencing her old papers. At the end, one line stood alone. You asked how I remembered so much. Truth is, I never stopped listening. Maya closed the notebook gently, her breath catching. She had asked him if this was about them, about some unfinished high school romance or gratitude masquerading as purpose. But she could see now, it was about space. Not the kind between planets, but the kind between two people who had waited decades to share a vision without noise or ego. The next morning, she found Keanu already up, brewing coffee. I've made my decision, Maya said. He didn't move, but something in his posture shifted. I'll take the role, but I need to do it my way, quietly, from the ground up. No press releases, no interviews, just the work. Keanu nodded, smile slow and real. That's exactly how I hoped you'd do it. And with that, they began something new. Not a restart, not a return, but the beginning of a collaboration long overdue. Maya sat on the edge of the guest bed in the small cottage, the sunlight streaking across the blanket like quiet threads of time. The folder Keanu had given her still rested on the desk, untouched since their conversation the night before. Her thoughts spun between the crashing waves outside and the stillness inside her chest. She reached for her phone. Sophia picked up after the second ring. Hey, Mom, how's Big Sir? Maya smiled at the warmth in her daughter's voice. Beautiful, quiet, a little overwhelming. That's a strange trio, Sophia teased. You okay? I wanted to talk to you about something, Maya began. She took a breath. Keanu offered me a role. It's more than I expected. It's not glamorous. It's not even public. It's just this incredible chance to finally build something I've only dreamed about. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Like your own research center? Yes. A fully equipped lab dedicated to microecosystems and marine restoration based on my theories. It would mean stepping away from the university for a year, maybe longer. Sophia didn't respond right away, and Maya felt a pinch of anxiety bloom in her chest. You've spent your whole life building a path, she said. I don't want you to think I'd throw that away. Mom, Sophia said gently, you've spent 20 years helping everyone else grow. Your students, your department, me. Maybe it's your turn now. Maya blinked, tears rising unexpectedly. You really think I should do it? I think, Sophia said slowly, you've been waiting for permission to want something just for you. This is your voice, Mom. This is where it's been heading. Maya looked out the window, past the cliffs to where the waves danced endlessly against the rocks. I need to think clearly. I might fly back to Toronto for a few days, clear my head. Then do it, Sophia said without hesitation. I'll keep watering your plants and feeding the cat. They both laughed softly, and then Sophia added, Whatever decision you make, just make sure it's yours, not mine, not Keanu's, not anyone else's. I will, Maya promised. I love you, sweetie. Love you too, Mom. After they hung up, Maya felt something loosen inside her, like a knot unraveling in the middle of her chest. She booked the flight for the next morning, packed light, and left a note on Keanu's desk. No explanations, just a promise. I'll be back soon. The air in Toronto was cooler, crisper than she remembered. The city had changed, of course, in ways both visible and subtle. But her old neighborhood looked remarkably the same. She walked past the apartment building where she had lived during her graduate studies, a modest red brick walk-up with ivy still crawling up the east wall. A kind older couple now lived in her former unit, but the landlord let her in for a short visit to retrieve a few personal items she had left behind in long-term storage. The basement storage room smelled like dust and time. She found her labeled box tucked near the back, Maya C. Paul Ike. It was heavier than she remembered. She carried it to a corner table, pried off the lid, and carefully opened the flaps. What she found made her breath catch in her throat. Inside the box were layers of papers, printed research drafts, lab photos from her undergrad years, old ID badges, and neatly bundled notebooks bound by faded rubber bands. Maya sifted through them slowly, the scent of dry paper and forgotten dreams rising around her like a whisper. Then she saw it. One folder marked in her handwriting, "Final Thesis Draft, Shared Copy." She hadn't thought of it in years. It was the version she had given Keanu the day before he left Toronto. A quiet farewell, wrapped in silence. She remembered writing him a note on the first page. For when the world overwhelms you, here's a small corner of it to study instead. Maya opened the folder carefully. The pages were yellowing slightly, but intact. Her title was still sharp in its academic tone. Microbial Resilience in Coastal Tide Pool Ecosystems, a model for environmental stability under stress. She smiled faintly at her younger self's ambition, but as she flipped through the document, her smile faded into stunned stillness. There were notes scribbled in the margins, familiar handwriting, looping and slanted, Keanu's handwriting. On page after page, he had annotated thoughts, questions, even personal reflections. One line read, "This could be applied to lunar environments. Similar fluctuation profiles?" Another, "The way she talks about balance in ecosystems reminds me of what I want in life." Maya pressed a hand to her mouth. He had read it. Not just skimmed it, but read it, absorbed it, engaged with it. On the final page, he had written a paragraph all his own. "You once told me that organisms that survive aren't the strongest, but the most adaptive. Maybe that's true for people, too. You see things in the small that I would miss entirely. That's your gift, Maya. You help people see the invisible structure of things, then believe they can change it." Maya felt the weight of the moment settle across her shoulders like a warm shawl. She hadn't known, not fully, that her quiet, precise curiosity had meant something beyond the lab, beyond lectures and field journals. She had made a mark on someone else's story, a story far grander than hers, or so she'd thought. But maybe it had never been about grandness. Maybe it was always about alignment. She carefully repacked the folder and placed it back in the box, tears stinging gently behind her eyes. Then, on impulse, she reached into her purse and took out her phone. She opened a blank text. It had been 2 days since she left Big Sur. No pressure, no questions. But now, her fingers moved quickly across the screen. "I found the thesis copy, the one you kept. You saw more in it than I ever did. I'm beginning to understand what this was all leading to." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The reply came within minutes. A short message from Keanu that simply read, "I always knew you'd find it when the time was right." Maya stared at her screen. her heart tightening in the way it used to when unexpected truth cracked something open inside her. For years, she had thought her work, her ideas, her quiet passion for ecosystems and coastal resilience had lived only in the footnotes of her career. But here was a reminder that someone had been carrying those ideas forward all along, not just in admiration, but in application, in action. She sat in the stillness of her old Toronto apartment, surrounded by relics of another life, and let herself feel something she hadn't in a long time. Closure. And more than that, permission to begin again. Later that afternoon, she met up with Sophia in a nearby cafe. They sat in a sunlit corner, each with steaming cups of herbal tea, the city moving in rhythms around them. Sophia listened carefully as Maya recounted everything she had found, about the thesis, the annotations, the quiet ways Keanu had remembered and honored her voice. Sophia didn't interrupt. When Maya finished, she looked at her mother with an expression that was both proud and serious. "You know," she said softly, "you've spent your whole life teaching people how to listen to the earth. But I think somewhere along the way, you stopped listening to yourself." Maya blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you taught me that change is hard, but necessary. That life isn't about safety, it's about purpose. And yet, when life offered you a chance to do more, you hesitated." Sophia leaned forward, her voice kind. "You've been guiding others for so long, Mom. Maybe it's time to let yourself be guided." Maya looked at her daughter, truly looked at her. There was no judgment in Sophia's tone, only encouragement. And clarity. "Do you really think I should go?" Maya asked. "I think you already did," Sophia answered with a smile. "The moment you found that thesis, the moment you wrote to him again, you said yes to something inside yourself. Now, the only question is, what do you want to build with it?" That night, back in her apartment, Maya opened her laptop and pulled up a blank document. No title, no formatting, just a cursor blinking on a white screen. She began to type. Proposal. Interdisciplinary application of microecosystem models in coastal and interplanetary resilience frameworks. A working title, she thought. A bridge between the world she came from and the one she might soon walk into. She paused, hand still on the keys, and glanced at the old folder beside her. Then she whispered aloud to the empty room, "Let's find out what this voice can really do." The tide had shifted, and this time she was ready to follow it wherever it led. The morning of the unveiling dawned clear and crisp, the kind of sky that made even the most skeptical believe something good was about to happen. Maya arrived early, stepping out of a simple black SUV onto the gravel path leading up to the main building of the research center. The structure was perched along the cliff's edge, modest in appearance but built with sustainable precision, solar arrays, reclaimed wood, and glass walls that mirrored the sea. From the outside, it looked like a well-funded marine station, but Maya knew it was more. Inside, it housed ideas she had been nurturing in journals for decades. Experiments that once felt too niche, too small, too quietly radical to find backing. And yet, here it was, standing, breathing, real. She wore no name tag, greeted no cameras. When staff asked, she simply said she was a guest. There was comfort in that anonymity. This wasn't about fame or titles. It was about witnessing something being born that she had once only dared to dream about. The main hall had been set up with folding chairs in neat rows. At the front stood a simple podium and a digital screen displaying the center's name, the Quiet Shore Initiative. Around her, reporters murmured about Keanu Reeves' latest philanthropic pivot. Environmental journalists traded guesses about the project's scope. A few whispered about rumors, something about local education programs, micro-habitat labs, maybe even underwater drone tech. Maya slipped into the back row unnoticed and folded her hands in her lap. Then he stepped out. Keanu Reeves walked to the podium without fanfare. No entourage, no flashing lights. He wore a soft charcoal suit with no tie, his hair tucked behind his ears, his expression calm. The room quieted instantly. He looked out at the sea of curious faces and smiled faintly. "I've been fortunate in my life," he began, "to be part of some extraordinary projects, films, foundations, collaborations that gave me purpose." He paused, glancing toward the ocean behind him, visible through the tall windows. But this one began not on a film set or in a studio, but in a high school classroom in Toronto. With a question I didn't know how to answer. A murmur ran through the crowd. Maya sat still. She asked me why I wanted to act. I told her I didn't know yet. She said, "Then don't perform for anyone else's expectations. Perform when it matters, when it helps someone see the world differently." He looked down, exhaled gently, then back up. I forgot a lot of things over the years, but I never forgot that. He clicked a remote, and the screen behind him lit up with a quiet reel of research footage: tide pools, kelp forests, local school children visiting the center, technicians testing drone samples from underwater coral beds. "We built this place to follow through on a promise," Keanu said. "A promise to honor unseen influence, the kind that doesn't show up on magazine covers or in Oscar speeches, the kind that changes the world anyway." He didn't say her name, but he didn't have to. The applause was steady, respectful, not wild, not performative, just real. Keanu stepped down from the podium, greeting a few local officials with nods and handshakes, but his eyes briefly searched the crowd until they found hers in the back row. They didn't exchange a wave, didn't smile theatrically, just a glance that held everything unspoken. Maya waited until most of the guests had left the hall. Some reporters lingered, piecing together their articles, but the spotlight had already moved elsewhere. Outside, the sun had begun to drop lower in the sky, casting long amber shadows across the cliffside. She walked the path alone toward the back of the building, where the staff had set up a small, informal gathering around a fire pit. There was no media here, just the project team, a few locals, and Keanu, seated cross-legged on a low wooden bench, his hands wrapped around a ceramic mug. He looked up as she approached, and without needing to say a word, shifted slightly so she could sit beside him. The fire cracked softly, a pot of tea sat on a side table nearby, and someone had brought out slices of fresh bread and seaweed butter. Simple, grounding things. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The silence was not awkward. It had a texture to it, a kind of richness that only existed between people who understood the power of quiet. The firelight flickered across their faces as the wind carried the scent of salt and cedar. Finally, Maya stirred. "I never imagined seeing anything like that," she said. "A place built from something I once sketched in the margin of a thesis. A speech that felt like it had been kept inside for years." Keanu nodded, his gaze fixed on the embers. "He said simply. "I don't need recognition," she added. "You know that." "I do," he replied, "but I needed to name it, not with press releases or plaques, just with truth." They fell into silence again. Someone nearby laughed gently. The sounds of dishes being cleared and soft footsteps faded as the group began to disperse. Eventually, they were the only ones left by the fire. Keanu turned toward her, his expression calm but searching. "Are you still unsure?" he asked. Maya looked up at the stars beginning to emerge above the horizon, tiny flickers over the vast sea. She thought about her lectures back in Vancouver, the schedule pinned on her office door, the familiar rhythm of a life she'd built with care. And then she thought about the lab here, the voices of the students she could train, the experiments she could finally conduct without compromise, the version of herself she hadn't met yet. She turned toward him and whispered, "I think I'm ready." The words settled between them like warm sand. Keanu didn't respond right away. He simply reached forward and added another small log to the fire. watching as the flames licked around the edges and caught slowly, throwing golden light between them. Then he looked at her, not as a man trying to persuade or impress, but as someone offering space. Space for her future, space for their past, space for whatever would grow next. "There's no rush," he said. "Everything here moves at the pace of the sea. It shifts when it's ready." Maya smiled faintly. "I think I've always lived on the shore, close enough to witness, but never quite willing to dive in. Maybe now you will." "Maybe," she said. They walked back slowly through the path leading from the fire pit to the main trail. The ocean murmured below, the same rhythm they'd heard 30 years ago when they'd sat beside each other after graduation. Except back then, it had all been potential. Now, it felt like continuity. As they approached the main station, Maya paused beside one of the signs newly installed that morning: Cliffside Ecological Research Initiative. The letters were carved into reclaimed driftwood, simple and weather-worn. There was no mention of donors, no photos, no branding, just the name. She touched the wood gently, then looked at Keanu. "Who else knows?" "Only the team here. No press releases, no gala events, just you and the work." "And Sophia?" "She knows, of course," Keanu said. "She's proud of you." Maya nodded slowly, her throat tightening. "I used to wonder if I'd missed my moment, but I think maybe the moment was always waiting." Keanu reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded page. He handed it to her without a word. It was one of the sketches from the journal, an old tide pool surrounded by scribbled notations with a starfish barely visible in the corner. On the edge of the page were his notes, in different ink, added over time. Her name was circled near a formula she had once explained to him at 17. At the bottom, he had written, "This is where it began." Maya folded the paper carefully and held it to her chest. That night, as she fell asleep in the quiet cottage by the cliffs, the sound of the surf drifting through the open window, she didn't dream of what could have been. She dreamed of what was beginning. The package arrived without a return address, tucked among reports and field samples on Maya's cluttered desk. It was small and light, wrapped in brown paper that had softened at the corners from age. Her name was written in careful cursive, unmistakably familiar. She stared at it for several seconds before picking it up, a gentle tremor in her hands. There was no note, no explanation, just the feeling that this was something meant to arrive now and only now. She peeled the paper away carefully, revealing a simple cream-colored envelope with a date scrawled in the corner, July 12, 1990. Maya sat down slowly, breath catching as she unfolded the letter inside. The paper was faded, the ink slightly smudged in places, but the words were clear, handwritten. His handwriting. "Dear Maya, O ye who dared to stand trial. I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't even know if I'll have the courage to send it. But there are some things I need to say, if only to get them out of my head and onto a page. It's been 6 months since I left Toronto. Los Angeles feels like another planet. Everything's louder here, faster, brighter, bigger. I've been going on auditions, working long hours just to get by. It's exhausting. And yet, every time I'm about to give up, I hear your voice in my head. The way you made me question everything. The way you saw the world, not just as it was, but as it could be. You used to say, what if we stopped trying to be impressive and just tried to be useful? I think about that more than I should admit. Maya's eyes blurred, a breath catching in her throat. Her fingers tightened slightly on the page, grounding her in the present as the voice from the past echoed through the quiet of her lab. I don't know if I ever told you how much that last week meant to me. Before I left. Those long walks. The way we didn't need to say everything to understand each other. I kept pretending it wasn't goodbye, that maybe one day we'd just pick up where we left off, that something bigger was waiting if we both kept walking toward it. I'd been terrified that you'll forget me, that everything we talked about, our dreams, our promises, would disappear into the noise of adult life. But the truth is, I remember you more clearly than I remember anything else. You've shaped the way I see the world, Maya. And even if I never get the chance to say it in person, I need you to know you mattered. You still matter. Maya felt a tear slide down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, even though no one was watching. The air around her felt heavier, like the letter had stirred something buried too long. She read on, heart thudding. Someday, if things align, maybe I'll send this. Maybe I'll find a way to tell you face to face. But for now, this letter will stay folded in my journal. Just know, wherever I go, whatever I build, you'll always be the girl who taught me how to think deeper, love quieter, and dream wilder. Always, Keanu. Maya lowered the letter slowly, hands resting on her lap. She stared out the small window of her research cabin, where the ocean shimmered under the late morning sun. The tide was just beginning to retreat, exposing the fragile edges of the reef she and Keanu had walked so many times. The same tide that had brought their memories back. The same tide that now seemed to carry his voice from 3 decades ago across paper, ink, and silence. She leaned back in her chair, breathing deeply. Not to still her heart, there was no point, but to hold it open. This wasn't just a letter. It was a map of where she had always existed in his mind. She read it again, slower this time, tracing each word like it might disappear. And as she did, she began to notice small, specific references that only she would understand. Phrases they had used in high school, a quote she once scribbled in the margin of his physics notes, even the way he signed the letter, "Always, Keanu," mirrored a joke they once made about loyalty being better than certainty. For 30 years, she had assumed she was a single footnote in the origin story of someone much larger than life, but this letter rewrote that truth entirely. She had been there, in his thinking, his reflections, even his fears, all along. A hidden influence, like coral beneath the waves, quietly shaping the reef above. A knock sounded at her door. It was Talia, the operations manager, holding a data tablet. "Just uploaded the latest sea temperature charts from the southern station," she said. "Thought you'd want them right away." Maya nodded and reached for the tablet, but paused. "Talia, do you mind if I ask you something personal?" "Of course," Talia said, curious. "If someone gave you the chance to go back, not to relive something, but to see it more clearly, would you take it?" Talia tilted her head. "Depends. Would seeing it more clearly change what comes next?" Maya considered that. "Maybe not, but it might change how I carry it." Talia smiled gently. "Then, yes, I'd take it." When the door closed, Maya turned back to her desk and reached for a small wooden frame. Inside it was a photograph of her and her daughter Sophia, taken years ago on a quiet beach in Tofino. She thought about the way Sophia had urged her to say yes, to stop living small, to trust that some chances come around again for a reason. Maya gently folded the letter and slid it into the frame's back compartment, hidden but not forgotten. Then she picked up a pen and a notepad. On the top sheet she wrote a title in firm handwriting, "Legacy Log, Day 1. Below it she scribbled her first thought. A legacy isn't just what we leave behind. Sometimes it's what we've unknowingly carried forward. Then she placed the notebook beside her microscope, right next to the letter's original envelope. A reminder, not of him alone, but of them. Of what they had built through decades of silence and science and trust. Down by the shore, a tide pool sparkled in the afternoon sun. The waves kept moving. The reef kept growing. Maya closed her eyes and let it all settle in. The fear, the gratitude, the long arc of a story that had finally come home. 6 months had passed, since Maya accepted the role as scientific director of the Coastal Research Center. The days had unfolded with a rhythm she hadn't expected but quickly came to love. Each morning began early, with her walking the narrow path from her cliffside cottage to the main lab building. The Pacific wind always greeted her with a salty rush, tangling her hair as if nature itself was urging her to keep moving forward. Inside the center, a new generation of researchers had taken root. Most were in their 20s or early 30s, idealistic, inventive, and tirelessly curious. They came from all over the world, drawn by the opportunity to do work that actually mattered, not buried under university bureaucracy or corporate deadlines. They were testing early tide resilient coral prototypes, adapting Maya's ideas with 3D printed marine structures, and refining data collection techniques using drones and underwater sensors. Her once theoretical ideas were now tangible, alive, progressing. Maya's days were full but not rushed. Meetings with the lead marine tech engineers, field dives with the interns, video calls with government officials interested in the center's early findings. Yet despite all the activity, there was a quiet calm that ran beneath it all, a certainty that she was finally in the right place, doing the right work. Sophia had visited 3 times since the opening ceremony. Each visit seemed to lengthen, and on her last, she brought news that made Maya's heart swell. Sophia had applied for an environmental science internship at the center, her own idea, not her mother's. It had caught Maya off guard at first, but then again, maybe it made perfect sense. After years of watching her mother build careers for others, Sophia now wanted to be part of something that felt like legacy. "I don't just want to study theory," she had said while sitting cross-legged on the deck of Maya's cottage, overlooking the sea. "I want to do what you do now. I want to help solve real problems, not just write papers about them." Maya had reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. No speech, no prideful explanation, just the quiet understanding between 2 women stepping into their purpose. And then there was Keanu. He had been back and forth, balancing his film schedule with the quiet demands of the research facility. Some weeks he was thousands of miles away, shooting on location, unreachable except for the occasional late-night call. Other times he was just down the hall, slipping her a coffee with a smile and nodding toward a whiteboard filled with equations only half deciphered. They never labeled whatever was growing between them. There were no expectations, no defined milestones, just a steady presence that no longer needed constant clarification. He showed up when he could. When he couldn't, Maya kept going. And when he returned, she never made him feel like he had to earn his place again. Their bond had become its own ecosystem, flexible, adaptive, resilient. On the mornings Keanu was at the center, the days carried a different kind of texture. He would often join the staff meetings, listening more than speaking, offering a question here or a quiet observation there. He never threw his weight around, never invoked who he was to the world outside. To the team, he wasn't a celebrity. He was the co-founder, the one who believed the project could work before anyone else had seen the plans. Sometimes Maya caught him sitting in the observation dome alone, staring out at the sea. She'd slip in beside him without a word, both of them watching the waves shift and churn. No conversations necessary, just the comfort of proximity, of shared silence that held years of history. The journal of unsent letters still rested on her bookshelf, never far from reach. Every so often, she would open to a random page, letting time pull her backward. One was written in 1999, during the peak of The Matrix's fame. Another was dated just after his sister's diagnosis, raw with fear and grief. Each letter revealed a version of Keanu the world never saw, and each one reminded her that somehow, without realizing it, she had been a lighthouse. The staff had grown from 20 to over 60. With the help of private grants and quiet donations from Keanu's network, they had expanded their reef restoration work into multiple international sites. A team had just returned from the Philippines, another was heading to Madagascar next month. The center had become a hub of global collaboration, attracting scientists and students who wanted to do more than publish papers. They wanted impact. They wanted to leave something better behind. One evening, after a long day of reviewing new equipment designs, Maya returned to her cottage to find a small envelope slid under her door. It was unmarked except for her name, written in Keanu's handwriting. She opened it slowly, expecting perhaps a note about a project timeline or a dinner invitation. Instead, it was a drawing, a tide pool sketched in fine graphite with tiny annotations around the edges, oxygen levels, algae types, light exposure estimates. At the bottom, in small, neat letters, he had written, "This is how you taught me to see the world, not just what it looks like, but how it works." Maya held the paper to her chest, her eyes closing. She didn't need declarations or promises. This was better. This was deeper. That night, they sat outside under a sky full of stars. Keanu had brought over a small fire pit, and the crackling of the flames mixed with the sound of the distant surf. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Keanu asked, "Did you ever think we'd end up here?" Maya shook her head. "No, but I think we always hoped we would." He nodded, tossing another log onto the fire. "It's strange, isn't it, how we spend so much of our lives chasing things, only to discover that what really matters are the quiet moments we almost missed." Maya smiled. "And the people who never really left." As the fire burned low, Maya leaned back and looked at the stars. The constellations hadn't changed in thousands of years, but somehow, tonight, they felt different, closer, as if the universe had finally rearranged itself just enough to make room for second chances. She didn't know what the next 6 months would bring, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid to find out. Not alone. It started with a headline, small, tucked into a corner of a digital science magazine. Anonymous director of Keanu Reeves's environmental project revealed to be Canadian marine biologist. No photo, just a short piece speculating about Maya Calderon's influence behind the scenes at the Coastal Research Facility in Big Sur. But in less than 24 hours, that headline had become fuel. Larger outlets picked it up, many rewriting it with flashier angles. Keanu's secret partner, the woman behind his climate crusade, romance or research. Fans react to Reeves's mysterious director. Pictures of Maya began circulating online, some from old university websites, others captured by paparazzi near the center's grounds. By the end of the week, Maya's quiet life had been replaced with a wave of requests. Reporters called the foundation, cameras lingered near the entrance gates, emails flooded in from old colleagues and strangers alike, some kind, others not. One message read, "You're just the latest woman they're using to soften his brand." Keanu was furious. He had seen it happen before, watched the media turn moments of sincerity into spectacles. He paced in his studio, voice low but tight with frustration. "We kept it private on purpose," he muttered. "This wasn't supposed to happen to you." Maya remained calm. She sat across from him in the cottage office, fingers wrapped around a ceramic mug, gaze steady. "It was always going to come out eventually," she said. "We didn't hide anything, we just lived it quietly." He dropped into the chair across from her, rubbing his forehead. "We can issue a statement. I'll talk to my team. I'll get them to shut it down." "No," Maya said gently. "Let it run its course. If we chase it, it becomes a story about damage control. If we stay steady, it will pass." Still, he couldn't let it go. "They're questioning your integrity, Maya, your work. That's unacceptable." She looked at him, not with fear, but with something closer to compassion. "They're questioning what they can't understand. You've dealt with this before. I haven't, but I'm learning." He sighed, still restless, still aching for some way to protect her. That evening, Maya took a quiet walk to the tide pools, alone this time. The wind had picked up, brushing her cheeks with salt and cool air. The sky was streaked with deep purples and burnt oranges. Her footsteps crunched gently against the gravel path as she walked the familiar stretch that had become her thinking place. The attention didn't change the research. The reefs still needed rebuilding. The data still needed checking. Her team still showed up, eager and focused, their goals unchanged by the chatter of headlines. But something had shifted in her heart. A space that once held only quiet dedication now buzzed with the awareness of being seen. Not in the spotlight sense, but in the deeply human way of being known and misunderstood, all at once. Back at the center, her staff gathered around her with unease in their eyes. "Is it true?" one of the younger interns finally asked, voice soft. "Are you and Keanu Reeves together?" Maya smiled, not as a deflection, but as a peace offering. "We work together," she said. "We believe in the same mission. The rest, that's not the story that matters here." They nodded, relieved in some way, though the question still lingered in the air. She let it. The media requests kept coming. Some wanted statements, others asked for sit-down interviews. A few dug up her old lectures and publications, attaching headlines like "Professor to Partner," "The Woman Behind the Star." Maya ignored most of it. But then a piece appeared on a primetime evening segment. It used footage of Keanu at the unveiling, spliced with a grainy image of Maya watching from the back row. The narrator's voice was cool and speculative. Who is the woman Keanu Reeves credited with inspiring his latest project, and why has she remained in the shadows? That night, Keanu called her from a film set in New Mexico. His voice was lower than usual, hesitant. "You sure you want to keep staying quiet?" he asked. "They're building their own story." Maya sat in her office, laptop open but untouched. She stared at the flickering cursor in an empty email draft. She hadn't known how to begin. "I think," she said slowly, "I'll do one interview, just one. But not about you." He paused. "About the science?" "No," she said, her voice firmer now. "About what it means to believe in impossible things." The next day, she accepted an invitation from a respected science podcast, one that often explored the intersection of ethics, discovery, and public perception. There were no cameras, just her voice, clear, thoughtful, unhurried. She spoke of the work, the reef models, the micro-ecosystem simulations, the urgency of coastal preservation, but she also spoke of influence. "I've always believed," she said during the closing question, "that the most powerful changes often begin in silence, in conversations no one hears, in ideas shared between two people who see the world not as it is, but as it could be. I've always believed in impossible things. Sometimes they believe back." The clip was shared widely, but the tone shifted. The headlines softened. The story turned from speculation to admiration, and then, slowly, as Maya predicted, the noise began to fade. One morning, she stepped into the lab and found Sophia waiting near the aquaponics system they had designed together. Her daughter smiled, holding up a digital tablet with a headline across the top. "Marine biologists' quiet leadership helps transform coastal research." The May finally got it right. Maya raised an eyebrow. "You mean they used my name?" "Ellie used your voice," Sophia replied. Later that week, Keanu returned to the center. No entourage, no press. Just him, walking up the hill toward the observatory dome with that quiet gait of his, hands in his jacket pockets. He found Maya in the observation room, studying wave current data projected across the walls. "You handled it better than I ever could have," he said. She looked at him, then back at the ocean moving across the screens. "I've had good training," she replied softly. He stepped closer, voice low. "You didn't owe them anything." "No," she agreed. "But I owed something to the work, to the people watching, who might believe in things because we do." He nodded, gaze steady. "It's strange, isn't it? After all the years we spent silent, It's our quietest truths that are the loudest now." Maya didn't answer right away. She just reached out and touched the screen, tracking the arc of a tide pattern along the coast of Madagascar. Then she said, "The world always asks questions, Keanu. The trick is knowing which ones deserve answers." And he smiled at that. Because of all the voices out there, hers was still the one that made his world make sense. The sun climbed slowly over the misty cliffs, casting a golden glow across the ocean just beyond the center's winding paths. At this early hour, the world seemed hushed, the gentle crash of waves the only sound accompanying Maya Calderon's steady footsteps. She crossed the compound courtyard, clipboard in hand, ready to lead the morning review of the coral microhabitat tanks. The research center had grown in ways she hadn't imagined. Labs expanding, new interns arriving monthly, all fueled by the promise of quiet innovation. In the main lab, Keanu was already there, sleeves rolled up, gently helping a young technician adjust a filtration unit that had jammed overnight. It was an unglamorous task, grimy, tedious, but he approached it with calm focus. Maya watched for a moment from the doorway, not saying anything, just observing the ease with which he moved through the space. Not as a guest, not as a celebrity, but as someone who had planted seeds here and stayed to help them grow. "You know you're not technically on the facilities team," she said teasingly as she entered. Keanu looked up and smiled. "And yet, strangely, they keep letting me touch things." The technician laughed, grateful for the help, and Maya made a mental note to commend Keanu again for how well he integrated. He never took credit, never hovered, just supported the work however he could. Together they reviewed the tank data and made notes for the afternoon team meeting. Maya had a lecture to deliver to the new batch of summer interns, many of whom had never worked in field conditions before. As they walked toward the small outdoor classroom, Keanu glanced at her stack of notes. "You're still handwriting your outlines?" he asked. "It helps me think," she replied. "Besides, the best lectures start as conversations with yourself." By mid-morning, the interns had gathered on the patio under the wooden awning. Maya stood at the front, the sea behind her, and shared stories not just about marine science, but about discovery, doubt, and endurance. She spoke about the fragility of ecosystems, the resilience of coral, and the parallels between human relationships and natural balance. From the back, Keanu watched her. She didn't perform, didn't dramatize. She taught the way she lived, with depth and presence. It moved him in a way few things did. Halfway through the session, a soft knock interrupted the flow. A guest had arrived. Maya nodded for the intern coordinator to assist, then continued without missing a beat. When the lesson ended, she walked back toward the reception building, curious. Standing just inside the entrance was a woman in her 40s, with weather-worn skin and a confident stance. She extended her hand warmly. "Dr. Calderon, I'm Claire Hughes, Marine Biology Institute of Wellington, New Zealand. I've wanted to meet you ever since I read your paper on intertidal adaptability structures." Maya blinked, stunned. That paper had only been published a few months ago. Maya guided Claire down the stone path toward the main lab building, still absorbing her words. "I'm surprised the paper reached you so quickly," Maya said, her voice soft with disbelief. Claire smiled. "It's been making rounds through our coastal modeling teams. Your design for adaptable modular reef scaffolding, it's brilliant, especially how it balances scientific rigor with practical implementation. We've been looking for something just like it for our own Pacific projects." Keanu, trailing behind them quietly, caught Maya's glance. He gave her the smallest nod. She didn't say anything, but something in her posture lifted, just slightly. They arrived at the reef simulation room, where rows of controlled tide pool environments stretched wall to wall. Claire leaned over one of the tanks, eyes wide, as she took in the subtle gradations in water salinity and temperature controls. "This is extraordinary," she said. "And your data sets, real-time updates, long-term trend modeling, You're running one of the most advanced coastal resilience labs I've seen." Maya gave a modest shrug. "We're lucky to have good people, and a few good partners." Claire glanced between her and Keanu, curiosity flickering in her eyes, but she didn't ask. Instead, she pulled out a USB drive from her bag. "I brought some sample data from our Auckland station. I'd love your thoughts, if you have time." Maya accepted it with a smile, tucking it into her lab coat pocket. Of course. They spent the next 2 hours discussing research methods, overlapping interests, and the possibility of a future collaboration. Maya's mind churned with possibilities. How New Zealand's unique coastal topography could test their designs under new conditions. How Pacific communities might benefit from shared research initiatives. As they talked, Keanu stepped back, observing with a quiet kind of pride. He didn't need to be in the spotlight to know he had helped create this moment. Just watching Maya in her element, her voice firm and passionate as she translated complex theory into actionable science, was enough. This was why he had built the center, to give ideas like hers room to grow. Eventually, Claire checked her watch and stood. "I've got a flight back to San Diego tonight. But thank you, Maya. And thank you," she added, turning to Keanu, "for helping build a space like this. It's rare." After she left, Maya and Keanu stepped outside, sunlight warming the flagstone underfoot. A soft breeze carried the scent of salt and lavender from the edge of the cliff. He said, "It's rare," Maya said quietly. "She doesn't know the half of it." Keanu turned toward her, brow raised. "I spent years thinking the only way to have an impact was through the university," Maya said. "Through citations and grants and lectures. But today, someone I've never met read my work, came across an ocean to talk about it, and wants to build something because of it." She turned to face him fully. "I don't feel like I'm living in your shadow anymore." Keanu didn't answer right away. His face was unreadable at first, then softened. "You never were." The journal arrived on a quiet afternoon, resting by the windowsill like it had always belonged there. Maya found it after returning from a morning walk along the coastal path, her hair still damp from the ocean breeze. At first, she didn't recognize the handwriting on the outside. It wasn't the sharp, angular print of Keanu's old notes, but something gentler. Age-softened, fluid, almost reverent. Wrapped in simple brown paper and tied with a string, it felt like something sacred. She brought it inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and untied the knot with careful fingers. Her breath caught as the cover was revealed. It was his sketchbook. The same old leather-bound one he used to carry everywhere in high school. Worn at the edges, cracked slightly down the spine, it looked exactly like she remembered, only now it held decades of time between its covers. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The first few pages were filled with fragments of his younger self, early doodles of surfboards, half-finished storyboards for sci-fi scenes, a sketched spaceship with her initials in tiny block letters drawn onto its hull. There were tide pools, too, many of them, drawn from memory and from the imagination of someone who had spent years replaying their shapes. One page made her pause. It was a tide pool they had once visited together near Scarborough Bluffs. She remembered it exactly. They'd spent hours crouched over it, her explaining species names while he asked questions in that quiet, curious way of his. She had thought at the time that he was just being polite. Now she realized he had been listening. He had remembered. Later in the sketchbook, the drawings changed. They became more precise, more mature. Some looked like early film concept art. Others seemed more personal. Glimpses of his world when words had failed him. Then, near the end, one image made her freeze completely. It was a new drawing, a tide pool at night, but instead of darkness, the sky above was bursting with stars. The edges of the rock pool curled upward and transformed into constellations. The water shimmered with galaxies, seaweed wrapped into the arcs of distant planets. and beneath the image, in his familiar hand, was written, "Where science meets wonder, that's where you'll find her." Maya stared at the words. A tide pool, merging into a starry sky. It wasn't just a tribute. It was a portrait, a way of saying, without ever using her name, that she lived in the space where discovery and wonder converged, that she belonged in the place between questions and the unknown. She turned to the back cover and found a blank page there. A pen lay tucked in the spine, the same kind she used in her lab. She hesitated, then picked it up and wrote her own line beneath his. "Where past meets future, I found my voice again." It was the first thing she'd written just for herself in years. And somehow, she knew, it wouldn't be the last. The journal stayed open on the windowsill for the rest of the day, sunlight catching the pages and casting the drawings in a soft golden hue. Maya would glance at it between meetings, between emails, between field updates. And each time she looked, it seemed to ground her, like the paper carried weight beyond the ink. That night, she brought it with her to the small reading nook just off her bedroom. It was the same space where she'd once doubted everything, her place at the center, her influence on the work, even her right to be remembered by someone like Keanu. But now, it felt different. With the tide pool sketch and the stars still fresh in her mind, she turned to a fresh page and began writing again. Not for science, not for publication, just for herself. "Today I remembered how it felt to be 17, she wrote, to believe my questions mattered, to know someone was listening, even when I didn't think they were." She paused, pen hovering, then continued. "I spent so many years shrinking myself to fit the world I thought I was allowed to inhabit. Lecture halls, labs, grant applications. But here, I've started asking different questions again, the kind that don't come with immediate answers." She wrote until the page filled, then another. Sometimes she captured fragments of memory, other times dreams for the future. Eventually, she closed the journal and rested it against the window frame, where moonlight pooled beside it. In the weeks that followed, it became part of her ritual. Early morning coffee, late-night reflections, moments between tides. The journal was always there. Keanu never asked what she wrote. He only smiled when he saw her carrying it and once said quietly, "It's good to see you writing again." They spoke often, but not always in words. Their rhythms had become second nature. Sometimes he'd return from a trip and she'd have a new system logged in the marine tracker. Other times he'd surprise her with a new reef modeling tool, built from a concept she'd once muttered while half asleep. One evening, after reviewing coral viability reports together, Keanu stood by the window where her journal rested. He didn't touch it, just looked at it for a moment. "Does it help?" he asked. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "It reminds me that I'm not just reacting to the world anymore. I'm shaping it again." He turned to her, that familiar look of quiet pride in his eyes. "That's all I ever wanted, for you to know that you were never a footnote. You were always part of the foundation." She nodded slowly, emotion tightening her chest. "And what about you?" "I'm still learning," he said. "How to slow down, how to stay still long enough to belong to something." They stood together in silence. Beyond the window, waves rolled in, each one reshaping the shoreline in tiny, imperceptible ways. And inside, beside the soft flicker of a nearby lamp, her journal lay open once more. Later that night, Maya added one more entry. This place, this work, this partnership. None of it erases the years I spent wondering, but it makes those years feel necessary, like they were preparing me to understand this fully, to not waste the second chance. She paused, then in smaller script added, "And maybe, to believe in impossible things again." The morning mist rolled in gently from the Pacific, painting the coastline in a silvery haze. Maya stood on the edge of the bluff, mug in hand, watching the fog curl around the rocks below. The tide was out, revealing pools nestled in the stone, each one its own universe. Some shallow and shimmering, others deep and still. She had studied these micro-ecosystems for years, but here, they felt different, more personal. Like chapters of a story only she and the ocean could read. Behind her, the research center stirred to life. Equipment hummed softly, voices carried faintly from the lab, and seabirds called overhead. It had become her rhythm. Mornings spent collecting samples or writing grant proposals, afternoons mentoring interns or collaborating with engineers, evenings walking the shoreline with Keanu, or sitting quietly by herself in thought. It wasn't the life she had imagined at 20, but it felt more aligned with who she was. That morning, Keanu found her by the railing. No words, just his familiar presence beside her. She handed him a second mug she'd brought, and they stood in silence, sipping coffee, looking out over the shore. "There's something I want to show you," he said after a while, voice quiet. Maya turned to him, curious. "Now?" He nodded. "It's just a short drive." They didn't speak much during the ride. He drove slowly, the winding coastal road revealing familiar views in new ways. About 10 minutes south, they pulled off onto a dirt path marked with a wooden sign carved with wave patterns and marine symbols. Maya had never noticed it before. As they walked down a narrow trail lined with low brush and coastal wildflowers, the air thickened with salt and possibility. Finally, the trail opened up to a broad, rocky shelf overlooking a particularly intricate set of tide pools. Some she'd studied before, others she hadn't. There was a new plaque near the path's edge. Keanu stopped a few feet away, letting her approach first. She stepped forward slowly, heart beating faster without understanding why. The bronze plaque was simple: Calderon Zone, dedicated to Dr. Maya Calderon, whose vision helped us see the small things that change the world. Her hand went to her mouth, then slowly dropped to her side. The tide pool nearest the plaque was one she had written about in her very first field report here. A pool teeming with sea anemones, brittle stars, and darting shrimp. She'd always thought of it as hers, informally, because it was where she had once discovered a previously undocumented algae sequence. But now it was official. She turned to Keanu, eyes brimming. "You didn't tell me." He shrugged gently. Some recognitions shouldn't be announced from stages. This one felt like it belonged here, quiet, in the place it started. Maya crouched beside the pool, looking into the water. The reflection of her face shimmered beside tiny ripples and shadowed movement. She wasn't the same person who had come here months ago, unsure of what she was looking for. She was something steadier now. Not louder, not more famous, just more rooted. "This was always your tide pool," Keanu added, voice low. "I just made it official." She smiled then, not wide or dramatic, but deep. The kind that reached her chest and stayed. Recognition. Not for fame or spotlight, but for impact. The kind that starts small and spreads quietly, reshaping lives and surely. Later that afternoon, Maya returned to the lab, still carrying the quiet awe of the morning. Her team noticed the difference in her, though no one said anything outright. There was a calmness in the way she moved between workstations, her presence like a steady current guiding everything forward. At her desk, she gently set down her field notebook, then paused. She opened it to a blank page and slowly wrote, "Calderon Zone, morning tide 7:42 IMM, species stable, light winds, water clarity high, emotional clarity unexpected." She underlined the last phrase twice. When Keanu passed by her window on his way to the main conference room, he tapped the glass softly. She looked up. He lifted a brow, silently asking if she was okay. She nodded once, smiling faintly. Inside the main room, a small planning meeting was underway for the next outreach initiative. Maya joined a few minutes later, taking a seat beside Sophia, who had just flown in the night before for her summer internship. Sophia beamed when she saw her mother sit down. They didn't need words. Something had shifted, and Sophia could feel it. Keanu gave a short update about facility upgrades and expanding the educational programming. When he stepped back to let others speak, Sophia leaned over and whispered to her mom. "I saw the plaque." Maya gave her a look, half surprised, half accusing. "Dad," Sophia caught herself and laughed. "Keanu told me about it a week ago. He asked if it was okay to surprise you." Maya shook her head gently. "He didn't need my permission." "No," Sophia said, "but he wanted your blessing. There's a difference." After the meeting, Maya wandered down to the community center where younger students came each week to learn about marine conservation. The chalkboard still had her diagrams from the last session, outlining how salinity shifts in tide pools reveal larger ocean changes. A little girl, no more than 9, looked up from the model coral reef she was building and asked, "Are you the lady they named the tide pool after?" Maya paused, then nodded. "I suppose I am." The girl smiled. "That's cool. I want a tide pool someday too." Maya crouched beside her. "Then keep asking questions. That's how it starts." That evening, back at the cottage, Maya found Keanu on the porch, tuning one of his guitars. The air was crisp, the sun just beginning to set over the ocean. He strummed lightly, not playing anything specific, just letting the sound fill the space. She stepped outside, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. He looked up. "Busy day?" he asked. "Meaningful day," she replied. He nodded once and returned to his tuning. Maya sat beside him in the old wicker chair. They watched the last of the sun dip beneath the horizon. She thought about all the times she had downplayed her own achievements, convincing herself that teaching others was enough. And it had been, for a time. But this recognition, this quiet honoring, felt like permission to believe in the depth of her own contributions. "Thank you," she said softly. Keanu didn't answer right away. He set the guitar aside and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I just wanted you to know," he said. "You've always mattered. Not because of me, because of what you saw in the world and what you helped others see." She reached out and took his hand, letting the silence between them say what words couldn't. The tide had turned long ago, but now, finally, she was ready to stand fully in the waters it brought. The morning air was quiet, brushed with the salt of the tide and the hush of wind weaving through dune grass. Maya stood at the edge of the beach where the land surrendered to the sea. The sun was just beginning to rise, gilding the waves in gold. Around her, a group of young scientists, some interns, some new hires, walked barefoot across the sand, laughing, adjusting gear, calling out field notes as they knelt beside the pools scattered along the rocky shelf. They were mapping ecosystem shifts, monitoring salinity, collecting samples. It was work she had done herself long ago. Now she guided from the shoreline, her hands tucked gently in the pockets of her windbreaker, her eyes focused not just on the present, but on the long, unlikely path that had brought her back here. It still amazed her sometimes how a single message, sent into the dark without expectation, had begun this whole transformation. The message to Keanu, the letter he had sent back, the visit to California, the project that wasn't about headlines or appearances, but quiet impact. Last week, she'd received a package from the local university. Inside was a set of applications, students asking to work under her guidance next season. Some had quoted her most recent paper on microadaptivity in intertidal zones. Others mentioned Project Calderon by name. Not Maya, not Keanu, just the science, just the work. And that was how she liked it. A shout broke the morning silence. 2 interns had spotted a new sea anemone cluster forming along a ridge of exposed rock. Maya smiled. She remembered discovering things like that when she was their age, the world bursting with questions. It still was. Behind her, she heard the soft crunch of footsteps across sand. No need to turn. She knew the gate by heart now. Keanu didn't speak right away. He stood beside her, gazing out at the same patch of sea. His hands relaxed at his sides. "D-Mail found a kelp regrowth line," Maya said softly, "just above the southern shelf." Keanu nodded. "I heard. Sophia sent me a photo this morning. She said it looked like the reef was breathing again." Maya smiled at the thought. Her daughter had become part of the rhythm here, visiting, contributing, building her own path beside her mother's. Keanu had supported her without hesitation. No fanfare, just quiet presence. That had become their way. "I still don't understand how we got here," Maya said after a while. "All of it, this life, this place, us." Keanu's voice was low. "Maybe we didn't get here. Maybe we found our way back." She looked at him then, and for a moment there were no layers between them. No time, no titles, just Maya and Keanu. A girl who asked big questions, a boy who dreamed impossible things, and the enduring current that had drawn their lives together again. The tide began to rise. Slowly, silently, it curled around the ankles of the interns still kneeling at the edge of the pools, too focused on their samples to notice the shift. Maya watched the water pull forward, then draw back again, a slow breath against the earth. That rhythm, change, and return, was at the center of everything they studied, and maybe, she thought, it was at the center of her life too. She felt Keanu's hand brush lightly against hers, not a question, not a claim, just presence. It had taken them years to understand that connection didn't always announce itself with declarations. Sometimes it arrived in shared silence, in work done side by side, in knowing someone would be there even when the words hadn't yet formed. "I kept that first letter," Maya said after a long pause. "The one you sent after I reached out. It's folded into the back of my field journal. I look at it sometimes when I'm trying to remember how this all began." Keanu nodded. "I think I needed to write it as much as you needed to read it." They stood there a while longer, watching the young team pull back from the tide pools, their laughter blending with the seabirds overhead. One of the interns waved toward her, holding up a small, wriggling crab. Maya waved back, pride swelling in her chest, not because they needed her, but because they had begun to need each other. A network, a future. When the students were gone and the beach was quiet again, Keanu knelt down, drawing something in the wet sand with his finger. It was simple, a circle joined with another, intersecting at the center. She smiled at the image. He had once drawn the same symbol on the back of a napkin at a cafe near their old high school. Two paths, meeting at the place where shared vision lived, where her curiosity met his boldness, where the science met the wonder. Maya leaned down and drew a third circle, smaller, beside the first two. "For Sophia," she said, "and all the others who come next." The tide came in again and softened the lines they'd traced, but she didn't mind. She had the real imprint in her bones now, in her memory, in this strange, beautiful life she'd reclaimed. As they turned to head back toward the center, Keanu glanced sideways and asked, "Are you glad you sent that message?" She looked at him. "I'm glad I believed in impossible things." He smiled, and neither of them said more. "Now we turn to you. Have you ever reconnected with someone after decades apart? Tell us what it meant to you in the comments. And what kind of story should Keanu star in next? A long-lost friendship, a hidden letter, or something you've dreamed of? Let us know below. Your voice helps shape what comes next.